That's it. That's the voice of Big Sister.
Mm-hmm.
So the story that I chose for today, I will share my screen in a minute, I hope. I'll be able to do that. Is a story that is, it was originally published as a children's story written by Isaac Bashevis Singer about 50 years ago. And it was put out as a children's book, so that children's books are smaller, less words on a page, a lot of illustrations, and so on. So it was originally put out as an independent work, and it's the retelling of the story, or in Isaac Bashevis Singer's way, of this week's Torah portion. It's called The Wicked City. So I'm going to try to see if I can do this. There you are. So in this edition, this was published later. All of his children's stories were collected without the illustrations. And Bashevis Singer was a character, and he writes his introduction. I thought it would be worthwhile to actually publish my stories without all those illustrations that get in the way, and just have the text. So here's the story itself. So The Wicked City. Would somebody like to, and we'll see, what he does that's overlapping with the way the Torah describes things, and where he takes some liberties or fills in things. Do we have a reader? All right.
I will
Carol.
read if you'll.
You're too late. You're too slow, Carney.
Okay.
No, I've read many times before, so I will happily defer to Carney.
All right, Carney, you got it.
Okay.
On
I'm not seeing the whole page on my screen. Is it?
What, you don't see The Wicked City?
No, I do, but it's the page is cut off.
I'll scroll it. I'll scroll it when we get there.
Oh, okay, fine. The Wicked City. When God commanded Abraham to leave the land of Haran, his nephew Lot decided to go with him. Lot was a lawyer. Haran, well known for his defense of criminals, a lawyer in Haran, well known for his defense of criminals. In such matters, he was very shrewd, though he had little feeling for justice. He instructed his clients to lie, hired false witnesses, and bribed the judges. Lot had grown rich and powerful. He had a large house, a pretty wife, and 2 lively daughters.
Bechira and Seira.
Seira, thank you.
Bechira means firstborn, and Seira means younger one.
Ah, very good. Nevertheless, his wife was not content. She wanted more gold, more pearls, and more slaves. She had heard that Sodom was an immensely rich city where there were many criminals who would need a lawyer, and she persuaded Lot that they should move there. Abraham was a holy man, a servant of God who knew nothing about the ways his nephew conducted his affairs. God told Abraham to leave his country, and he obeyed. When Lot suggested to him that they travel together in the direction of Canaan, which was near Sodom, his uncle readily agreed. Before he left Haran, Lot sold his house, his cows, his oxen, his horses, his donkeys, and his camels. He and his family rode on Abraham's donkeys, ate his bread, and at night covered themselves with his animal hides.
Okay, so wait, one second.
Yeah, sure.
So let's just take a pause,
Mhm.
and if we can try to recall what we remember from the Torah's story from last week, and going into this week. We haven't yet got to this week's Torah portion, but last week's Torah portion feeds material into this story. What do we have that obviously is connected to the Torah's way of telling the story, and where do we have some differences?
Well, there were no lawyers last time.
Right. So that's an updating of the story, right? Lot is a mystery person. We just know that Lot,
That's right.
Abraham's nephew, and is going along on the same trip. But here we have a little backstory, and we have him not as being some young, naive, young nephew following his uncle. He actually has, established himself. He's a mature man. He's got his own family. He's got a profession. He's got the way of doing his profession that Bashevis Singer, describes. What else? what else is a key difference? So
When
the choice
God-
of going, yeah, go ahead, John.
When God telling him to go,
So it's related to that. Like they're going along to Canaan, and they're ending up, and Lot ending up in Sodom is here collapsed into the beginning of the story. The way we read the story, out of the blue, God's voice comes out and speaks to Abram and says, okay, get moving and I'll tell you later where you're going to go. And of course, he has to take the journey with Sarah, with Lot, and they end up in Canaan. And it's only later, after some other episodes, that we get to the point where Abraham and Lot are deciding that they can't be together. And then Lot chooses to go to Sodom. So here in Bathsheba Singer's retelling, Sodom has been on Lot's mind before they even left Haran. And in fact, let's just read this. I had to scan this. Right, when Lot suggested to him that they travel together in the direction of Canaan, which was near Sodom, his uncle readily agreed. What answer is Bathsheba Singer providing to a question that we could have from the Torah reading? So the answer is,
why Lot's with him, right?
no, well, the question is that this is the answer to, if God says to Abraham, I'm not going to tell you where to go yet, where you're supposed to end up. How did they decide actually to go to Canaan? How did they decide to, why didn't they go to China? Why didn't they go to Azerbaijan or some other place? Why did they end up deciding to go to Canaan? So there is another possible answer that the Torah hints at, which is that was actually the plan of Abraham's father originally, but they never really followed through on it. But as the Bathsheba Singer gives us here his own suggestion, which is Canaan was actually Lot's idea, because God actually doesn't say anything about where to go. And Lot is simply saying, oh, this is a great excuse to get closer to Sodom. So so he piggybacks on Abraham's sense of mission. Hold on, 1 second, I'm sorry. I have to see what this is all about here. Okay, John, do you have co-hosting on this?
Yes, I do. I mean, no, you have to give it to me.
Okay, so how do I, wait, so how do I?
It should be in one of the controls at the bottom.
All right,
I can't remember
okay,
which one it is.
I'll be able to do it. David Kanigis just called that he's having trouble getting it. So when waiting, Josie Seaman is waiting. So, and Josie Seaman is waiting, and now,
Oh, you got to let him in.
I know, I just let Josie in because I didn't
You
have.
got to turn the chime on every time.
You're so right. You are so right. As always.
Unfortunately, not on Google, it's automatically on, but
Right, okay.
on Zoom, you have to turn it on every meeting, unfortunately.
So for plus you got to keep this box open.
Write
Yes,
yourself
it is.
a note on Post-it and stick it on your monitor so you
Yeah,
know what.
why not? Okay, so here we go. So for Bathsheba Singer, this is actually a certain kind of manipulation on the part of Lot to get Abraham, who has this undefined sense of mission, to decide to go in that particular direction. Okay, so now let's start from before he left Haran. Okay, start from there again. Harney, it's all yours.
Okay. I'm
Right here, third line.
before he left Haran, Lot sold his house, his cows, his oxen, his horses, his donkeys, and his camels. He and his family rode on Abraham's donkeys, ate his bread, and at night covered themselves with his animal hides. Sarah, Abraham's wife, said to him, "Why does Lot use your belongings? He's not a poor man." "But he is my brother's son," Abraham replied. "Besides, we have no children, and after our death, he will inherit all we have. Why shouldn't he use now what will one day be his?" When they approached the land of Canaan, God told Abraham that he was to settle there. But Lot said, "Uncle, I do not wish to remain a burden on you. I will go on to Sodom. I was told that there is a great need for lawyers there, and I will surely be able to earn my bread." "Well, go and may God bless you," Abraham replied.
Okay, so we have a little bit of a retelling of how they decide to split it off between the two of them. And we also have an appearance, a little short scene with Sarah. Let's keep all of that stuff in mind for later. Go ahead. Arnie, it's all yours. See where the arrow is? Lot left for Sodom.
Muted myself. Lot left for Sodom with his wife and daughters. When they arrived at the gates of the city, however, they were stopped. Strangers were banned from Sodom by law. The people were even forbidden to sell food to travelers. In those rare cases where a foreigner was allowed inside, he was usually killed during the night. Such was the custom of this sinful city. Lot was about to turn back, but his wife addressed the gatekeepers. "My husband is a lawyer and a famous defender of criminals. In Haran, there was a man who had..."
Wait. Can you guys see my box with the participants also? Do you see
No, we
that?
can only see our own.
So do you see the rest of these of the screen of the text?
Can only see what you can see in that window.
So how do I get it to stay?
Well, where are you trying to go? You're at the top of the page. Murdered both his parents.
Yeah, that
I know,
At
but
the top.
but your pictures are blocking part of the text for me. Doesn't
no.
It should be a separate window for you, the text. You can squeeze the window smaller.
I am. But it doesn't move over. Doesn't here. There. Okay, good. So
There
go
was a
ahead.
man-
In
there was
Haran,
a
there was a man
who had murdered both his parents, but my husband got him off scot-free. "Well, how did he manage that?" asked one of the gatekeepers. "He pointed out to the judge that the killer was an orphan, and an orphan deserves mercy. The murderer was not only freed, but inherited his parents' fortune as well, and is now one of the richest men in Haran." When the
Okay, this is
gatekeepers,
an old famous joke, right?
yes, an old famous joke indeed.
The definition of chutzpah. Right? The definition of chutzpah is when the person is brought up to the trial for murdering his parents and then says, "Come on, have mercy, I'm an orphan." Okay, good.
When the gatekeepers heard this story, they sent a messenger to the elders of Sodom. The elders were so impressed to hear of Lot's defense of the orphan that they not only decided to allow Lot to enter the city, but invited him to remain and become a citizen of Sodom. Lot quickly got used to Sodom and its customs. True, he spoke the local language with an accent, but otherwise he behaved like a born Sodomite. His wife accustomed herself to Sodom's way of life even more readily. Once, when a beggar came to ask for bread, she replied, "I give only stale bread." "But I'm so hungry," the beggar said, "that even stale bread will satisfy me." "Oh, but alas, we baked today and the bread is still fresh. Come back in a few days. The bread will then be stale and I will give you some," Lot's wife said, although she knew very well that the beggar would die of hunger if he had to wait so long for food. On another occasion, the peddler came to her and said, "I have 2 sacks of apples for which the usual price is a silver shekel per sack. But I am in need of cash, and so you may have both sacks of apples, and I will only charge you for one. That gives you 1 sack free." Lot's wife took 1 sack of apples, but did not pay the peddler a penny. "Why don't you pay me?" the peddler asked. "Oh, I took the free sack," she replied. When he tried to argue, she set her dogs on him, and he barely escaped with his life.
Right, so good old clunky jokes are here being used as a way of describing total cruelty and insensitivity to another human being, right? So what is laughable for one person is, of course, obviously a matter of life and death for somebody else. Okay, the neighbors.
The neighbors who heard about these incidents were filled with admiration for Lot's wife. It wasn't long before she forbade her daughters to speak either Hebrew or Aramaic, the language of Haran. In Sodom, behave like a Sodomite, she instructed them. She also told them never to mention their great uncle Abraham and their great aunt Sarah. It is below our dignity as honorable citizens of Sodom to have an old fool in the family who believes in God and obeys his word, she said. One day, Lot's wife hired a drummer to walk the street.
One second, just for a second.
Okay.
So again, to try to like contextualize the kind of imagery that Bathsheba Singer is presenting for us. Does this, in not just in biblical times, does this in more modern times echo with any kind of stereotypes or images of people that we're familiar with? John.
She just needs a coat that says "I don't care." I think.
Okay.
You get that reference?
Yes.
Melania Award.
I wonder where she got the bargain on that coat. Yeah. So that would be one thing, simply, and that's of course the title of this story, The Wicked City, or the Wicked Society, or the Wicked, country. But this whole thing with fitting in to this new milieu, does that echo anything that we would know about in our own stories as a people or as immigrants? I would suggest that what he's dealing with here, what he's using for his own purposes, is the story of people that want to fit in, and as a result, they throw away everything from their past. Here we have it: don't speak Hebrew anymore. Don't speak any of those. Right? Let's try to, and if Pops speaks with an accent, it's so embarrassing. But we're going to be able to learn the language the right way, so that we'll be able to assimilate into society. This is a Jewish immigrant story, but it's also an immigrant story for many, many other groups, each in their own way with their own language or their own accent. You want to lose that accent. You want to be able to fit in. You want to be like a Sodomite in Sodom. The idea of these, these kind of parvenus who are trying to make it, is a story that was a painful story within every immigrant group, including the Jewish immigrant group in the West. Okay, one day,
Lot's wife hired
and embarrassment for the people, the old generation that's still religious, right? To have to tolerate grandpa or somebody that still holds on to the old ways, was always a strain. So here, that's this, Abraham and Sarah are those old fogies that still hold on to the old way of doing things. Go.
One day, Lot's wife hired a drummer to walk the streets of Sodom and sing the praises of Lot. The drummer stood in the marketplace and called out, "My lord Lot in his wisdom is able to save from prison or death, thieves, murderers, vandals, swindlers, and robbers. There has not been so great a defender of criminals as my employer since the days of the flood." The number of Lot's clients immediately increased. He became one of the most popular men in the city and was appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Sodom. His daughters, Bechira and Sirah, married 2 young Sodomites who were studying law under Lot. But one thing annoyed Lot. He could not rid himself of his foreign accent, and he sometimes forgot himself and used Hebrew and Aramaic expressions. His wife and daughters were embarrassed by the fact that Lot could not hide his Hebrew origin. This was especially true when he drank too much. In Sodom, it was the custom to drink excessively. Lot often drank, and at such times he used whole phrases of Hebrew and shamed his family. One day, a messenger arrived with the news that Abraham of Canaan was coming to visit Lot. Lot was beside himself. In Sodom, all men shaved, but Abraham wore a long white beard. He spoke only Hebrew or Aramaic, and what was worse, he did not believe in idols. He served a God who was said to have created heaven and earth, and whom none had ever seen. Lot knew in advance that the visit from his old-fashioned uncle could bring him only shame and disgrace. His wife and daughters were even more upset. Bechira and Tzira announced that if that old Hebrew uncle came to the house, they would leave. But Lot argued, "How can I not receive him? He's my father's brother. Besides, I'm his heir. His wife Sarah is old and will certainly never bear a child." "You've been talking about that inheritance for years," Lot's wife said. "Abraham's almost 100 years old. It's time for him to die." "Well, so what do you want me to do? Kill him?" Lot asked. "Then why not?" his wife replied. "If Sarah dies and he marries a young woman, he may still have an heir, and we won't get a shekel of his money." Lot could scarcely persuade his wife to let the old man come.
Okay, so we have shades of Lady Macbeth here. We've got this element which was introduced all the way back, actually. If we look over here, before he left Haran, Lot sold his house, his cows, etc., etc. He ate Abraham's bread. At night, he covered himself with Abraham's animal hides, and Sarah complains. Right? And what is the answer? It's my brother's son. Besides, we have no children. He will inherit all we have. And then it comes out right over here. The murderer was not only freed, but he inherited his parents' fortune. So this is like a little motif that Basheva Singer has introduced into the story. It's not quite out of nowhere, but it's not mentioned in the Torah. In the Torah, Abraham asks God, "What's going to be? You've told me that I'm going to have descendants and I'm going to have, a future, posterity, progeny." But in the end, uven meshek beiti damesek Eliezer, that the person who's going to inherit from me is my servant Eliezer. That's what Abraham says. So the idea of inheritance is already mentioned in the Torah story, but it's not ever brought up actually as a Lot element. And this is one of the things that Basheva Singer has decided to take. He creatively repurposes that motif and puts it in to bring up some of the tension or the possible drama in the family. What else do we have in this particular section right here? What other new kind of repurposing does Basheva Singer accomplish? Do we ever have a story, a scene in the Torah that Abraham ever came to visit Lot in Sodom?
I don't think so.
You're correct. There is no such scene, right? Lot and Abraham part ways when Lot gets in trouble and he's a war captive. Lot frees him, but he says explicitly to the king of Sodom, "I don't have anything to do with you," and they go their separate ways. And there is no record in the Torah of Abraham ever seeing Lot again, and no record at all of Abraham visiting the city. So, but what visiting the city story do we have in the Torah? Who does the Torah tell us did visit the city of Sodom?
The travelers, right? The sort of mysterious.
Two angels. The two angels.
The two angels
who come after they finish visiting with Abraham. There were three angels that visited with Abraham, and then one of them finishes his mission. His mission was to talk to Abraham, and the other two are going on to Sodom. One of them is going to destroy the city, and one of them is going to save Lot. Here, instead, we have Abraham is planning a visit, and we have now this whole to-do back and forth between Lot and his wife. How's his wife coming across these days in this story so far?
Worthy of turning to salt.
Yeah.
I've been
not
thinking
even
the same story.
right, and not even kosher salt, right?
Ah, he's
Right, so,
terrible.
so she's definitely a villain. What do we make of Sarah's complaint earlier? Is she also a little bit of a negative female figure? I mean, Bathsheba
Yes.
wasn't exactly the greatest, feminist. So
You could say yes and no. Yes, she was complaining because the nephew was using all their things and he had sold all his stuff. There really wasn't a need for him to sell everything. He could have kept what he needed for the trip, and that's the negative part. But I always thought she was a nice person.
So the question is,
Sarah.
how is she being portrayed here? Is she being portrayed here as a kind of a shrew, or stingy or something like that?
You could say that.
You could. Is there any other way to look at it?
Maybe she was thinking of looking out for her husband and what their needs were.
Maybe she's the realist,
True.
right? And Abraham is the guy with the cloudy vision, who wants to think the best of everything. And Sarah can't be fooled. She knows. Look, it's not like Lot again. According to this story, Lot has a CV, of as the announcer
Meister.
that went through the city. He's the great defender of criminals by hook or by crook, mostly by crook, right? So so she knows what kind of guy this guy is. So do we look down on what she's saying, or is she actually the one who has some kind of moral compass and says, this guy is a deplorable, and she's not afraid to say it. Okay, so Lot, at least to his credit, persuades his wife that Abraham should come in peace and not be killed.
Except, shouldn't he be afraid she's going to kill him if he shows up?
Well, that's what apparently he persuades his wife to let him alone.
All right.
Maybe. You're right. Okay, here we go. Barney, back to you. Before long.
Before long, Abraham arrived in Sodom. As a relative of the illustrious Lot, he was allowed to enter the city. But Abraham brought his nephew even more embarrassment.
How'd you know that that's what it said?
I could tell. And Lot had more than he'd feared. His beard seemed even longer than before, and he carried a staff and sack like a beggar. He was accompanied by two servants, Gabriel and Raphael, who were as outlandish in appearance as he.
Who are these servants?
Angels.
The angels.
Here come the angels.
So the very first day, Abraham did something that grieved Lot immensely. He stood in the marketplace and in a hoarse voice called out, "People of Sodom, repent! Stop your thieving, swindling, murdering. Desist from abusing strangers, dishonoring your parents, and eating the flesh of animals while they still live. If you do not forsake your evil ways, God will destroy Sodom." The people who heard Abraham's words laughed at him and mocked him. "What God is that, you old fool?" one of them asked. "Well, the God who created heaven and earth," Abraham replied. "A God who hates bloodshed and falsehood, cruelty and injustice. But where is this God of yours? What has he made? Stone, gold, copper, ivory? Neither stone, nor gold, nor copper, nor ivory. No one carved or cast him," Abraham answered. "He cannot be seen. He has created the oceans, the mountains, the deserts, the people, and the animals. He's all merciful and provides for all that lives." "Why did Lot allow this crazy uncle to come here?" one of the bystanders asked. Others pelted Abraham and his two companions with the dung of asses. "This is what happens when one admires strangers," said another.
Admits.
When one admits strangers, said another. "Sooner or later, they will bring other foreigners with them."
Right. So now they're beginning to turn on Lot, right? We're letting Abraham come in because we let Lot come in, and now look.
Anti-immigration.
Lot
Yeah,
was,
there
Lot
There
was
goes the
good-
neighborhood.
Right. Lot was the good immigrant. But
Right.
now look what this led to. Now look what we've got. right? Disgusting.
He should be deported, cried a man in the crowd. Well, no need to deport me, Abraham replied. I do not want to stay, but I warn you for the last time, repent. But no one showed any sign of repentance. That
Mark,
evening,
you're really getting into the drama here. This is good.
That evening, in Lot's house, Abraham repeated his warning. Sodom will be destroyed. He said to Lot, if you want to remain alive, rise at dawn, take your family and leave the city behind. Soon after sunrise, there'll be nothing left of Sodom but sulfur and ashes. The old man's insane, screamed Lot's wife, no longer able to contain her anger.
He also went by also known as Crazy Eddie.
Found refuge. Lot had ordered his servants to prepare a feast for Abraham and his companions. They had roasted a suckling pig, stewed beef and blood. They roasted a suckling pig, stewed beef and blood, and boiled a baby goat in its mother's milk. These were the delicacies of Sodom, but Abraham, Gabriel, and Raphael refused to eat, saying that such food was an abomination before God. Abraham asked that some unleavened bread be prepared for him. Lot's wife was mortified before her slaves. The Hira and Sirah felt shamed before their husbands. Outside Lot's house, a crowd had gathered. They threw stones at the windows, demanding that Abraham and his companions be brought out so they could be made sport and torture them according to the customs of Sodom. With great difficulty, Lot persuaded the rabble to leave. It was very late when Lot and his family went to bed, but Abraham and his companions did not retire. Lot, who could not sleep, overheard Abraham pleading with his God. Wilt thou destroy the just with the wicked? If there be 50 just men in the city, wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 that are just, 50 just that are therein? That be far from thee to do after this manner. Shall not the judge of all earth do right? What if there be 5 less than 50 just persons? What if there be 40 found there? What if there be 30 found there? What about 20 found there? What if 10 shall be found there? Lot's wife too had awakened.
So just again, just to point out the obvious, this of course is taken pretty much straightforwardly from the biblical account. However, what are some of the simple differences between the way the Torah tells the story and the way we have it in this story?
The Torah doesn't say anything about eating a pig or boiling a kid in its mother's milk.
Not in this particular story, but in other places, of course, it says you're not allowed to do those things.
Yeah, but it doesn't say anybody did it.
Right. Well, the idea that Lot is doing all this transgressive stuff and presenting it to his observant, scrupulous uncle, that's not in the story. What about this whole bargaining scene, where Abraham is bargaining for the salvation of Sodom?
In the Torah, God answers, "No, I will not do it for 40. No, I will not do it for 30."
Right. So that little detail is left out, but it's assumed, right? Because you have it. He keeps on going down lower and lower and lower, so you can sort of assume the answer. Who is a witness to that confrontation between Abraham and God in the Torah?
No one, right?
Who?
No one, right?
No one. The reader.
Yeah.
The reader. It's a private colloquy between Abraham and God. And it doesn't take place in Sodom. It takes place at Abraham's encampment, right? He escorts the angels out a little bit. They leave, and then he stands before God, and he has this discussion, because God tells Abraham that he's planning to destroy Sodom, and Abraham says, "You can't do that." Here, what is the context? Where is this scene being played in Bathsheba's Singer's house?
Like
In
his
Lot's
bedroom or
house.
something, right? Like
Right.
maybe
In Lot, and Lot is overhearing this, right?
Right.
Lot hears his own uncle, who he's embarrassed by, who he's tried to embarrass back, even though we have some places here where he's defended Abraham, right? He saved him. He persuades the rabble to go back home and not to hurt his uncle. He obviously earlier persuaded his wife not to do his uncle any harm. And now he's hearing, what Abraham himself is doing to try to save this people. Okay, but Lot's wife.
Lot's wife, too, had awakened. The old man's certainly not in his right mind, she said to Lot. If you do not get rid of him tomorrow, I'll leave you, and the court will make you turn over your entire fortune to me. You'll have to pay me 1,000 shekels a week or go to jail. Oh, I implore you to be quiet, Lot pleaded. Is it my fault that I have a silly old uncle? Well, it's certainly not my fault, Lot's wife hissed, nor is the fault of our daughters and sons-in-law. They won't be able to show their faces in the street. Even so, they call us the Hebrews. Whenever there's a disagreement, they yell, "Dirty Hebrews," and tell us to go back to Haran. Finally, Lot and his wife dozed off. The night was hot. A burning wind rose from the desert and blew fine hot sand through the cracks of the shutters. Jackals wailed in the distance. At dawn, when Lot got out of bed and looked out the window, he grew afraid. The sky was unusually red. The air was heavy and smelled of scotch and sulfur. Scorch and sulfur.
Yeah.
Scorch and sulfur. There's probably some of that around too. The rising
I
sun
like
was
the scotch.
it's the color of blood. Lot said to his wife, "Who knows? Perhaps my uncle Abraham is right and a catastrophe is about to befall us. Sometimes the insane have a sixth sense. What should we do?" "Let us get out of the city," urged Lot. "That can't hurt. We'll accompany the old fool a short distance and then we'll turn back." His wife disagreed. "The neighbors see us leave, they'll think we've taken the old man's threats about the destruction of the city seriously. They'll accuse us of believing in Abraham's God, and if the elders hear about it, they'll make us leave for good." "Oh, we'll just say we're going on a picnic," Lot said. "Let's take a hamper of food and wine along."
Okay, so what effect did Abraham's pleading before God, what effect did it have on Lot or his wife?
None. They don't
Oh.
even acknowledge it.
It did unload. I mean, he says maybe he's trying to find a way to buy into it.
Well, does he believe his uncle is crazy?
Possibly, but it's possible he thinks he's crazy because he says sometimes, the insane have a sixth sense. So you could almost read it either way.
Right. He's not.
He's definitely spooked.
He's definitely spooked, but he's not
Yes.
attributing it to God. He says, "Ooh, there's this real creepy storm brewing," and sometimes crazy people know about this, but this has nothing to do with the issue of repentance or morality. And his wife definitely doesn't get it, and her arguments are all about fitting in, as we had before. We still have, there's a residual anti-Semitism that we suffer from. The only way to get rid of it is if we're really nice and do everything we can to be just like everybody else. And then their plan is, let's not make it so obvious that we're deserting ship, because we want to be able to come back. We want to be able to come back and be welcomed back. So let's tell everybody we're just going, we're on a picnic. We're not fleeing danger. We don't really believe that the city is going to be destroyed, because when the city is not destroyed, we're going to have to fit in with our neighbors again. We're coming back, right? So that's how they have to plan it out. Okay, Lot's wife.
Lot's wife and daughters were finally persuaded, but Lot's son-in-law wanted nothing to do with the picnic. They whispered to each other that it was high time to get rid of their father-in-law and his family. After much squabbling and haggling, Lot loaded a hamper of pork and a keg of wine on a donkey. Lot's wife did not lock the house because in Sodom, a lock was of little value. Lock breaking was even studied by children in school. The thieves' admiration for Lot would prevent them from robbing their beloved judge. Now the sun had disappeared. The sky was overcast with yellowish clouds. The air became heavier and the smell of ashes and sulfur stronger. Flocks of crows flew about croaking. Vultures appeared. The camels and the donkeys brayed. The oxen bellowed. Dogs barked. Cats meowed. The earth burned the soles of people's feet. The animals stampeded from the city. Even the rats and mice departed from Sodom in droves. The people of Sodom hurried to prostrate themselves before their clay, stone, silver, and gold idols in the temples. They promised sacrifices of cattle and human beings to placate what they believed was the wrath of their gods. Abraham and his companions, Lot and his family, had scarcely left the city on the road toward Zoar when a raging fire descended from the sky and turned Sodom into a furnace of smoke and flame. Abraham called to Lot and his family, "Don't look back. Run with all your might. My house, my furniture, my clothes, my rugs, my furs, my jewelry," wailed Lot's wife. She looked back, perhaps debating whether to return, and in that very instant became a pillar of salt. "Oh, woe, woe, see what has happened to our mother," Lot's daughters screamed. Lot tried to take his wife by the arm, and when he saw that she did not move, he put his hand to his mouth in fright. He tasted of salt. "Salt! My wife has turned to salt," he wailed. Abraham, however, urged them on, and only after they had covered a good distance did he permit them to stop and look back. What had been a teeming city only a short while before was now a mountain of smoldering ashes. "Lot," Abraham said, "know you that my companions Gabriel and Raphael are angels? Now that you see the truth, repent and turn to God." "What truth? I believe neither in God nor in angels," Lot said. "But you see what happened to Sodom," Abraham insisted. "Oh, the volcano erupted. It has nothing to do with your God and his angels."
Okay, this is what's called living in denial.
Continue.
Yeah.
Turning to the angels, Abraham said, "He will remain as he is until he dies. Let us go on our way." "Uncle Abraham," Lot said, will you first give me part of my inheritance? You will soon die, and I have no money left." "Cannot give you part of your inheritance," Abraham answered, "because my wife Sarah is to give birth to a son. Thus have the angels promised. Is that not so, Gabriel and Raphael?" "Why, yes, it is true. Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son."
So that's the promise that is announced to Abraham right before this Sodom story. So it fits right in. Of course, just to again emphasize, Abraham is not in the Torah. Abraham is not present for any of this, right? But now Basheva Singer makes this into a confrontation between Abraham and Lot. Okay.
Continue.
Yeah.
"Are you saying that in her old age, Sarah will give birth to a son?" Lot asked in astonishment and began to laugh. His daughters laughed with him. "Why do you laugh, Lot?" Gabriel said. "Is there anything the Lord cannot do?"
Okay. So another stolen motif by Basheva Singer. Where did he grab this one from?
The Torah.
Yeah, where?
Tells Abraham he'll make a great nation.
Not just that.
The laughter.
Where do we have the laughter in the Torah?
Sarah laughs.
Sarah laughs when she hears that she's going to have a child. And then God says, "That's right. You laughed, and that's going to be his name. His name is going to be the laugh." So that laughter motif is connected to Isaac. That's what Isaac's name means. And in the original story in the Torah, it's laughter by the people who are going to be blessed with the child. Here, it's a laughter of derision by Lot and his daughters. Okay.
"Nonsense. Superstition," Lot said. "Tell your fairy tales to the fools of Canaan, not to me. I'm too clever to believe such idiocy." Abraham and the angels continued on their way, leaving Lot and his daughters behind. "Father, what are we to do now?" Lot's daughters asked. "Oh, I have lost my wife, and you have no more husbands," Lot replied, "but we do have a keg of wine." They uncorked the wine keg and were soon completely drunk. After a while, they found a cave where they settled down and lived like savages. Except for defending criminals, there was nothing Lot knew how to do. His pampered daughters, who'd learned little except how to eat, drink, and give orders to slaves and servants, and how to mock the poor, the beaten, and the sick, now lived in filth and sin. The evil city of Sodom was never rebuilt. It remained a desert where not even wild animals ventured. In time, Lot again settled in some corrupt city and again became the champion of murderers, thieves, and swindlers. He never heard from Abraham again, but he no longer cared because he learned from wandering peddlers that the angels had spoken the truth. There would be no inheritance for him. Abraham did not again visit his faithless nephew, Lot, and Lot's sinful daughters. Sarah bore Abraham a son just as the angels had predicted. He was called Isaac. He in turn sired Jacob, from whom stem the 12 tribes of Israel.
And that's the end of the story.
It's great. I'd love to see their illustrated version.
Right. So yeah, if you go on Amazon, maybe at least see the cover. I don't remember if you can actually get into the book. But as I said, Sheva Singer was very proud to be able to offer this this text as a text. Hey, I'm a writer. I'm not interested in the illustration. But let's think about actually one aspect of that, which is that this is written as a children's story. What do you think about it as a children's story?
Well, it's in the tradition of dark fairy tales, I suppose.
It's also a way of teaching a lesson about if you're too materialistic or don't, quote, behave yourself, bad things can happen.
Okay. How about this whole business about murderers and thieves and swindlers?
I think it's a little too sophisticated for children.
This
Yeah.
story troubles me.
The story troubles you? The Torah story or this story?
I'm sorry?
The Torah story in general or this particular version?
Well, this version, it troubles me because it departs sufficiently.
So I think I'm going to stop the sharing now, so then I can see everybody. Except I never see you anyway, because you're always on the phone.
So he's not on the phone.
Oh,
this
look
time.
at there you are. I saw you.
Behold,
I saw you. Okay, go ahead. So yes, what the
What I'm saying is that it departs, and this is something a problem I have with historical novels. You know, it departs sufficiently from the Torah story that a child, maybe at the age of 12 or 22 for that matter, a grown-up, might not
our
be
age.
able to distinguish, pardon?
Our age.
Might not be able to
22 plus.
distinguish between the Torah story and this fiction, which is parallel to the Torah story.
So
Did Abraham really go? And you read the Torah story, where's the part about him visiting Lot in Sodom? So
Or where's the part of him working in the idol shop?
exactly.
Well, that's in Midrash too. That's not in the Torah either.
Well,
right. So I think that the bigger question that you're asking, is what is the creative license that we have with this? Besides telling the story exactly as it is, are there any other options, and are there any red lines that we shouldn't cross, or how much creative leeway do we have, and for what purpose? Right. So what did Sheva Singer, achieve by changing the story, like David, was saying, changing it in many, many ways? We examined some of the ways. What was gained? Anything?
Possibly a better understanding of what happened in Sodom. And
And
why
it actually, to me, it makes it more relevant to people who are living, and to us, in similar situations. I can identify with lawyers who are doing crooked things to defend people who are criminals. You can see that, so it makes it more relevant. I mean, I love that liberties are taken. I think
it helps explain it in a more modern way.
Well, we humans can be creators, so we have that license. We were given that license to create things.
But don't writers basically have a poetic license for things they write when they base it on something?
Then they always get in trouble.
Yeah.
They get in trouble with it, right? And it's a catch-22. If they take license and they say, look, I can, this is fiction. This is not my life, or this is not the person that you think I'm modeling this thing of. Sometimes they have those little disclaimers at the beginning. All of the people in this story are made up.
Fictional,
Similarity
right.
to anybody else is purely coincidental, right? So
But
there's
it's really your sister-in-law.
right.
The
But
funny thing is, it's never coincidental, ever.
Right.
and then David's question is the question. So when are we supposed to, what's fake news and what's the real thing? How do we do them? So
What
I
this
mean,
story accomplishes really is it explains things that might be questions in the mind of the Torah reader. Was Lot's wife really a problem? Whatever became of his son-in-laws? How did he survive in Sodom? All these questions that
Mhm.
might occur to somebody are answered. They're answered satisfactorily, but it's so parallel. The story of Abraham breaking his father's idols is at such a turn and an angle from Torah that we can tell that it's really a story. But this runs so parallel that it just troubles me. It fills in some blanks, but it troubles me.
Yeah, my sense is that the Torah story is subtle and leaves a lot to the reader, whereas here, Shiva Singer is like overdoing it.
He explains a lot.
His characters are too mean or too naive or
Fills in
too,
the blanks.
yeah, it's
that's
not
that's
subtle.
where you get the fairy tale quality, and that's where you get the children's quality, right? There's a
Maybe.
certain amount of extra depth, but it's still a little cartoonish, right? A little,
Well, too much.
a little stereotyped. But on the other hand, as it does fill in a bunch of things, as David says, if you read the Torah story, you have a lot of questions. Here we've got a way of filling in some background that explains it.
More than that, though, it makes it recognizable to us as that's our world that's being talked about. I mean, how many? I've walked through Times Square where someone's yelling "repent," and you go, "Oh, what a lunatic," and you walk right by.
Right.
It's we there are things we can take from his story and relate to times now, as John has just explained.
So just a side thing. Yes, that's what the Talmud says. The Talmud says that prophecy today has been given to lunatics. So it's the age of prophecy is over. So when the people in Times Square say whatever they say, it's not prophecy, it's lunacy, or it's foolishness. But at least that's part of what they say. But coming back to here, I mean, one of the things that we have is we have a little bit with all of the, like I say, stereotypical part of it. We have in a believable portrait of a character who in the Torah is a complete cipher, right? Lot. We really don't know anything about Lot. We have, his accompanying Abraham on the journey. Why? I always read it as a very beautiful thing. Basheva Singer was a little more cynical than I am. He sees the whole groundwork for the tragedy is already laid before, right from the beginning. He gives Lot a personality. He gives Lot a profession, obviously, something that we can actually identify in modern terms. The guy is an amoral guy, and yet every once in a while he feels family loyalty. He feels a couple of qualms. Right? And that in itself is actually pretty sophisticated. That's it's not simply the good princess and the bad princess, the good witch and the bad witch or whatever. I mean, the same thing that we have in the Torah. Lot chooses Sodom with no defending on the part of the Torah. It was a bad place. He shouldn't have chosen it. And then, as his life is shown to us in a couple of little flashes, it gets a little more complicated. And here we have some added, sinews and added to the bare bones of the story. And like John keeps saying, sadly, it actually very much resonates too many elements that we know of today. And what I was pointing out before was this kind of like somewhat subtle, and I don't know how many of the kids who would read this, even in 1972 when the book was published, would relate to the whole assimilation critique. Would relate to the whole
No,
immigrant.
their world is America.
The immigrant that wants to fit in. One of the things about children's stuff, a lot of the time, like children's TV. I remember when we used to watch The Simpsons or even Sesame Street.
Oh,
Really tiny. They knew that parents were going to be there with the kids, so they had to throw in a little bit of entertainment for the parents that was going to go over the heads of the kids. So even though there would be, simple kinds of things that would entertain the little children, every once in a while there'd be a little reference or a little, kind of a humor or some snarkiness or whatever. That was a wink to the grown-ups, right? So children's stories are interesting because are children's stories just children reading the stories? If it's a young adult novel, then they're on their own, right? Their parents are out of the picture. But children's literature per se is actually children and parents.
Yes.
Right? The parents are reading the story to the kids. These kinds of illustrated little books are part of the bonding between the grown-ups and the children. So Basheva Singer is writing, with two audiences happening at the same time. And Carney, you want to say something? You're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute. You are on mute.
I am unmuted. For every midrash that we know and that survived, there are thousands that
correct
vanished completely for good reason, and
I suppose or not good reason,
or no, often not good reason. Yes, I mean there are famous 19th century novelists that are totally forgotten.
Right.
Anyway, Singer seems to be of a class that his stories will be read and remembered. So there must be something in them that.
Right. I want to just give one quick response again to David's original question, and I think that one of the advantages of having a reworking of a story is that you can compare, which is what we did in a very quick kind of way. So how will they know that this is not the real story? That's that was your original question. The answer is that's the adult's job to point out that this is not the real story. Now let's reel the read story, and then let's see what the difference is. So it becomes a platform for further learning. It becomes a way of getting Bishinantam Levanecha. Teach your children. This is the story one way, and this is this is the other story. And just historically speaking, the Abraham and the idol story, you would be surprised how many people think that's in the Bible. You would really be, everyone would be surprised because people take it for granted. That's such a classic, must be in the Torah. And of course it's not. All right, so enough for today. Yeshua for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Let's all hope for enough strength to meet the future and make it meaningful.
Wisconsin was just called for Biden, by the way.
Oh, Mazel tov. That's great. That's great news. Thanks.